Hey, welcome to another episode of In the Chute. Today, Calen and I are going to discuss something that's going to be a surprise to me, as normal. So, what have you got for us, Calen?
Well, I don't know. By the time this comes out, hopefully some of my work will be published with Days of Dunroven. But I've been writing a story for them, and there was something in one of the stories that made me think of, because a lot of it's loosely based on us and whatnot. But it
Right.
was one of my experiences that I got as a cadet, and um, essentially the story is about how people meet a Montanan and they're like, oh, they kind of ask you questions. And back when I was a cadet, I legitimately got the question, do you have running water? So
No,
in Montana, asking Montana, do you have running
stay the
water?
hell out. We don't
So,
have running water
well,
here.
so there you go. There was my question, and I got a couple of them. Does Montana have power? Does it have running water? Does it have cars? And do people ride their horse to school? So there we go. I'll give it to you.
Uh, where are they from that they're asking these questions? We don't want them to come to Montana. It sucks here.
Oh, this person was from Texas, so
Texas ain't a whole lot different than Montana,
it's
unless
not.
they're
It's
unless
not.
they're San Antonio, Dallas, Houston.
Yeah.
Those are pretty urban areas, but still, they got a culture there that they should know better. Um, you know, electricity. We've always had electricity that I can remember, um, but we've been in some cow camps, some neighbors that didn't have electricity when I was a kid growing up. But I think most everybody's got electricity now. Uh, Telephone. I never had a telephone until 4 years after I graduated from high school and left home.
Well, and that's interesting too, because that was a big deal for you guys to get a telephone, a landline to the house.
Right.
And now it's actually interesting because I know a lot of people that don't have house phones anymore. It's only cell phones because
Yeah. No,
everybody,
well,
they just got it on their person.
the at the time though, I don't know if there's a comics that you would know called Dick Tracy. He was a detective.
I know of it. Yeah.
Okay. And he
Talking
had a
talking to the
talking into his wristwatch. And I was like, that was so futuristic. I was like, that'll never happen.
I see that
Well,
every
guess
day.
what?
Yeah.
It happened. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it gone from that. When I was a little kid, we lived down at the lower place for a short time, and we had what was called party lines, which meant
Mm.
that there were two or three people on the same phone line, but you had an incoming call that was either one of them would be like three rings, three short rings, another one would be two rings, short rings, and another one would be like a normal phone ring. So whichever one was assigned to your house, you didn't answer the phone unless those are the rings you heard. But you pick the phone up and be talking, all of a sudden you could hear a click and the sound would get a little less. Somebody else picked up the line to see what you were talking about. I
Mm.
mean, that's what a party line was. So for a very short time, we had a telephone when I was very small, first grade, something like that,
Yeah.
kindergarten, first grade, and then we moved the other place and never had a phone until after, of course, years after I left for uh, my own life after high school. But 1984, end of it, 1984 is when mom and dad got a phone out there at that place, and we moved up there on the top of that hill. And I remember dad called. At that time it was the Bell Telephone Company, and it was before the big conglomerate breakup. And I remember we went to town, went to a cousin's house, and he called him from there, called the telephone company, and I could hear him, hear his end of it, and he's on the phone. And he goes, "What? Well, I don't need a damn hotline to Washington. I just want a goddamn phone." It's like at that time it was like $2,000 or something. I mean, we might as well had asked for 50,000. We just
Yeah.
didn't have that kind of money, and at that time, $2,000 was a ton of money.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I still consider $2,000 quite a bit of money.
Well, it is, but I may be wrong on that. Maybe it was 1,000, but still, it doesn't matter. It's the same amount, but it
Yeah.
was an enormous amount of money, and so in order to get around that, we used CB radios, and there were a lot of people in the area had CBs, and we would communicate, and they would make calls for us or just contact somebody for us or whatever, and everybody did that and helped everybody else out. But yeah, so we had power, no telephone, running water. I've always lived with running water, except again for like cow camps.
Mhm.
Um, at the main ranch north of town, they never got an indoor bathroom until 1967, I think.
Jeez.
Yeah, and I can remember being a little guy running out to the outhouse,
Mhm.
because there was no indoor bathroom, and the bathroom was really just an addition when they did get an addition onto the old ranch house. So you just went through the back door. Now became a kind of a mud room with a toilet and a tub and a sink, and that was it. It was very very simple, but they went all those years, there with no running water to speak of for that purpose. But oh geez, let's see. Some of the other neighbors that didn't have electricity didn't have, of course, water in. They had a hand pump in the
Mm.
house, and you
In the
could get
house, huh?
in the house. They had, it was one of the old. It was a tabletop size with you think of the old thing where Helen Keller was,
Yeah.
making the breakthrough with that kind of a pump. Only it was sink height. It was mounted at the top of the table under a sink, and you'd stand there and you'd give that thing about 6-8 pumps, and pretty soon you could hear the water coming up,
Oh
and
yeah.
then
Just
and then
keep
you
going.
stand there and pump that thing as long as you needed water. So just an old water hand pump for the water. So that was those are kind of novel, but they're only novel if you're not living that way. If you're
Yeah.
visiting, it's different. Cars, yeah, I can never remember a time we didn't have cars. Everybody's had cars since
I would say the
my
size
grandpa
of,
didn't have.
like, to keep in mind, Montana is the fourth largest state in the union. So if we didn't have cars, it would be really painful to travel across the state.
Huge. Yeah,
Uh,
well, but you had trains
yeah.
that
Well,
time.
even those though, I mean, going back to like in the Carter days when the
Oh,
vehicles were 55 miles an hour. I mean, that,
oh,
think about how painful that was.
I know how
A
painful
train
that was.
and a train goes. I don't know how painful, but I can only imagine. And a train goes even slower than that. Like, I was just
Right.
thinking the other day, like, driving when I was in college, we went. It used to be reasonable and prudent was the speed limit
Yeah.
before I remember. I don't recall this, but then it's always been 75 until I was halfway through college, and they changed it to 80 on the interstate. And just 75 to 80 was a huge deal for me because my trip from Bozeman to Shepherd dropped from 2.5 hours to all of a sudden 2 hours and 10 minutes. I was like, woo,
Right.
I got 20 minutes shaved off. This is a 40-minute round trip deal that I can just knock it out. That's more beer drinking for me on Saturdays and Sundays.
There you go. Well, there when I was a little kid, there was no speed limit then. No, there was a nighttime speed limit of
Yeah.
55, but no daytime.
Yeah.
And I can remember really good friends of mom and dad's. I think you know who she is, Lenore Hawes. If she
Mm-hmm.
watches this,
Yeah.
she'll recognize. But they lived in Harlow, and we were in Rygate. And from the little town of Broadview to Acton, when you are headed towards Billings, is about 10 miles or so, 8 miles of, I mean, dead straight flat road.
Yep.
And I remember going to town one time. I was with mom and my sister, and mom's driving, just the three of us, and we're headed into Billings, and somebody goes flying around us during the day, and you could see the plate, you could see the car, and mom goes, "Holy crap, Lenore, I'm pretty sure that was you, but you're going by so fast I couldn't tell for sure." So perfectly fine. And she was, she wasn't all over the road or anything like that, but man,
Yeah.
she was not letting any grass grow. So uh, then during the Carter years, and well, before that, God, was it Nixon that did 55-mile-an-hour speed limit during the day? It might have been. Anyway, oh my God, was that? It was torturous to go anywhere at 55 miles an hour. A trip from Missoula to Billings, for instance, would probably take you 6.5 hours, 7 hours, maybe. I mean, it's just brutal. Um, and then they opened that up, and that was pretty nice. But yeah, it bounces around, and it's kind of political, because when it was reasonable and prudent, every wreck that would happen, the highway patrol would deem
Speed's a
it as
factor.
speed is a factor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if they're pushing some alcohol thing, then all wrecks were,
DUI.
alcohol is a factor. I mean,
Yeah.
they're very political about that. But the one beautiful thing about the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit was, at that time, if you got picked up during the day, it was a $5 fine. And because it was federally mandated, the Montana being Montana and the individuals we are, even the legislature passed a deal that it was not against a lot of speed. What you were doing was wasting a fossil fuel because it was beyond the 55 mile an hour. So it actually cost more money. It was a $5 fine to be doing 70 miles an hour in a 55 daytime speed zone. So it cost more money to actually process the dang ticket after a while than it was than what you paid for. But it was basically, the state of Montana flipping off the federal government because it was a mandated thing. So that's kind of funny. That was just Montana being Montana.
And then the last one, did you ever ride to school on a horse, or did you ever know anybody that did?
Oh yeah. Oh, I think you had kids in your class that did that to the
I
end
did,
last
but
week in school.
yeah, there's a caveat to this though. It is still in the Montana law that if you ride your horse to school, because I did seriously look at it because I was gonna do it. What led to me not doing it was the preparation, because that's the caveat, is there's preparation. And then I was a multi-sport athlete, so it was so rare for me to not be in practice after school that it was like it wasn't worth it, because you're not only riding the horse to school, you got to ride it back. So the caveat being though in the Montana books is you can bring your horse to school and it
must.
Yes, you're right. It must be cared for, as in stored somewhere like a stable or a fence or something like that. It has to be fed and it has to be watered. Those are the three things that your school is required to do in Montana state law.
Right.
Caveat, here's the big but. If you do not let them know accordingly, and I think the minimum, is it 3 days? But realistically, you should do it a month or so out, because they have to go. These are people that they don't normally acquire hay or anything like that. Right. They have to go out and they have to go get this stuff.
Well, that's why we have buses now.
Right. But you gotta tell them, hey, superintendent is probably the person to do it, or your principal. Hey, I'm going to ride my horse to school on this day. I need the stabling, the water, and the feed. The person that I had in my class came to school. We watched him ride up at like 9:00, and which, keep in mind, that's an hour after school starts. So he was tarding to begin with. And second, he didn't tell him about it. So he walked in and saw people outside. He's like, hey, hold my horse. And he had him hold their horse. We were laughing because I was like, that's hilarious. And I even said it too when I saw it. I was like, I hope he coordinated. And he didn't, because he came out and his head was hanging. I was like, what happened? He's like, they won't do it. They said I didn't notify him. I'm like, yeah, you got to look at the fine print, man. So he had to ride back home, and he came back after lunch. So it was one of those things that is like, man, you gotta, it's cool. Montana still has it, just like any other old things. You can't be, there's weird ones, like you can't have an unaccompanied sheep in the cab of your pickup.
Right. Women, I don't know if this is still on now either, but a woman could not walk down the street by herself. She had to be accompanied by a male escort.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of these are 1800s type,
even
Victorian age.
Another one too, and I've heard this in bar fights with Native Americans, is a party of, I think, 3 or more Native Americans is considered a war party in the Montana state books, which is ridiculous. Nobody's ever going to do that. But, of course, that's a way of somebody in a bar fight egging other people on. It's a war party. But there's just all these weird.
Like a friend of yours that we both know and love.
Yes, and that's who I'm referencing.
Yeah. He's like my own kid, but I would just want to beat him once in the head when he does stuff like that.
Yeah. But I mean, there's just stuff like that, and like the horse thing. It's one of those cool nostalgic ones. So you got to look at the fine print. You got to prepare for it. Otherwise, they will not abide by it.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I think there's one like women couldn't fish on a Sunday. I mean, just bizarre stuff. Like, okay, what the hell? Why? What's the deal with that? So yeah, there's some kind of. You're right, kind of holdover stuff that's harmless. Like those, but they're there, and that gets exercised, bringing your horse to school now and then. and it's kind of a neat deal to be able to exercise that and let people remind them that, you know what, this is how we used to get to school. I mean, there's some broader lessons there. They're doing it just to stick it to the man most of the time.
Sure.
Of course, the kid you're talking about, I'm sure, he goes to poke the bear like that and ends up getting poked himself. So he's a good kid, but good God, think about it.
So with that, to answer your question, Montana does have power. It does have running water. I don't know how we would survive without cars, but we could because we got horses because we'll ride them to school. So.
Most of us. Some of us, not most of us, just some of us. But yeah, exactly.
All right. With that, we'll put it out to pasture.